What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the FCL podcast. Another great weekend in college lacrosse. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Stephen Rehfuss and Matt Dunn. Matt, excited for you to kick it off today.
Thanks, Deemer. Today, we are going to kick it off with our 2-minute drill run by Stephen Rehfuss, going over notable previous games and performances from this past week and weekend. Next, we will get into our players' perspective. We're going to talk about mindset and how players can approach the game, how teams can approach their games, one play at a time with a 0-0 mindset. After that, we'll get into our GPUs, which are our games, players, and units. Then we'll get into our trends. Today, we are going to dive a little more deeply into some stats that we've noticed: shooting percentage, save percentage, face-off percentage, and what we're seeing in some of these top teams and how they're doing in those categories. And then lastly, we will look ahead at some big games this upcoming weekend. With that being said, Stephen, you want to take us through the 2-minute drill?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Some notable games on both the men's and the women's side. Like Deemer said, huge weekend for college lacrosse. So some men's games that stood out: Duke beat BU 12-7. In the Ivy League, Harvard got out to a really good start. They beat Dartmouth 18-7. They're really looking for, locking up that third spot in the Ivy League behind Princeton and Cornell. In the Big Ten, Ohio State took it to Hopkins at home 14-10. Syracuse with a big win in the Dome, 14-9 over Notre Dame. UNC was able to double up UVA, winning that one 18-9. They had a nice doubleheader with the women's team. Rutgers, probably the biggest win of the weekend, an 8-6 win over Maryland. On Sunday, Penn State and Michigan played. Penn State won that one 11-8. And then I did want to shout out Loyola. Loyola men got their first win of the season. I know that might sound crazy, a 12-11 win over Bucknell in overtime. But then last night, so we're recording this on Wednesday morning, last night, Tuesday night, Loyola fell to Towson 13-12 in overtime. That is Loyola's fifth one-goal loss of the season. One of those losses did come to Maryland in overtime. So just, a very uncharacteristic year for Loyola, but wanted to shout out their first win. On the women's side, Yale took it to Syracuse on Wednesday, 13-10, big win there for Yale. Northwestern dominated Hopkins 18-5. This weekend, Maryland beat USC 16-8. Stanford beat Notre Dame 8-7. And then the headliner of the weekend, and I know we talked about it a lot on last week's podcast, having McKenna Davis on, UNC beat BC 12-11. This is a matchup that I would assume we're probably going to see at least one more time, but most likely two more times between the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament. Moving on to notable performances, I kept this list really short, just some guys that really stood out with some, significant numbers from the weekend. Carden Stoller, the Rutgers goalie, he was 70% against Maryland, and he also scored a goal. Very impressive goal. It wasn't even from the midline. It was within his own box on the 10-man ride. Another guy that stood out, Reed Gills, the Penn State Fogo. He went 8 for 9 at the faceoff X, and he took the majority of the faceoffs down the stretch, helping Penn State win that game over Michigan, helping Penn State get back on track. And then Johnny Mullen, the Syracuse Fogo, he went 70% at the X versus Notre Dame. He's been having a really impressive season, and that was a nice heavyweight matchup between himself and Will Lynch. And Johnny Mullen was really the difference maker in a big win for Syracuse in the Dome.
2 MIA guys there with Carden, BL guy, Reed, a Severn guy. Reed's a freshman, I believe, at Penn State, right?
Yeah, he was a 2024 faceoff guy. I believe he played for Crabs. He's definitely one that came in with, a nice trajectory ahead of him.
I just had to pull up, Stephen, as you mentioned, Loyola, because, I remember, and this just goes to show what I know, what we know, and just how these seasons always go. Loyola is losing to Maryland by 1 early in the season, losing to Hopkins by 1. Looks like a really good team. And then just really challenging stretch of, lost to Rutgers 10-5 and Rutgers, just beat Maryland. Rutgers has had obviously a good team. Lost to Colgate by a good amount, but then lost to Providence by 1, lost to BU by 6. BU's turned out to be a very good team. Lost to Lafayette by 1, Lehigh by 4, and then Bucknell 1-goal win in Towson, 1-goal loss. So just like one, and like, I don't know if there's something to it or just like one of those years where they seem like they have a quality team that's right there, but just in a lot of these games haven't been able to get over that hump. So I'm glad you shouted them out with their win, but I do think Loyola is better than their record indicates.
Yeah, I think they've got to be the best 1-10 team in the country, the best 1-10 maybe ever. And looking at, they've got Holy Cross, Navy, and Army left on the schedule. if I'm any of those teams, Loyola is not a team that I want to play. Like, I still think Loyola is good. I think Matthew Minikis is a guy that's, one of the best attackmen, definitely in the Patriot League, but also, in the country. He's put up, some pretty impressive points this year. And, I've liked a lot of the film that I've seen from him.
It's one of those teams that I think next year, and again, I haven't looked at in terms of like what they're returning, but it's something that you think about. It could be this just really impactful season this year of growth and trial and frustration, and could be something where their redemption story next year could be something that we're very well talking about.
Yeah, 100%. And we've mentioned it before, but we know that staff there, they have a proven track record. Coach Toomey, head coach, Coach Matt Dwan, Coach Van Arsdale, Sean Cottle, Coach Dave Cottle's son is there in a third assistant role. They have a great bunch there, and they'll figure it out, whether it's the end of this year or next year. I think you can trust that. The other one that kind of pops out to me here, Stephen, is last week we're looking at the battle for third place in the Ivy League, Harvard, Dartmouth, and it seems like Harvard really ran away with that 18-7. No, I didn't get to watch that game. We've talked about, like, we followed Harvard pretty closely. They've had some great offensive performances this year, and Dartmouth has proven to be a very solid team. Kind of just seems like this one got away from Dartmouth early and they weren't able to catch up.
Yeah, Harvard jumped out to 7-0 lead, and, it was 11-1 at half. So it just feels like, Harvard obviously came to play. Dartmouth has been having a good season. I'm not counting them out by any means, especially in the Ivy League, but, impressive win there. And, we've got, I believe, 3 weeks left of Ivy League play here now.
Quick question before we move on for both of you guys. What's the worst first quarter you've ever been a part of, like, for your team?
Probably either playing UNC or Notre Dame in 2021. I don't remember what the score was, but it was over pretty early.
Yeah, I actually can't remember off the top of my head, like, specific quarters or situations, but I know that pretty much every season we had a couple games, whether it's college or pro, that first quarters were just pretty rough go rounds.
I have two. One was my senior year at Penn State. We went down 8-1 in the first quarter. We actually won the game in overtime, like 13-12. But, like, this was pre-shot clock, and we were giving up like 6 or 7 goals a game. And in the first quarter, we gave up 8. And I remember going over at the end of the quarter, and I was like, I look at Tim Muller, I was like, we're going to give up 30 goals tonight. It's going to be the worst defensive performance in, like, lacrosse history. And then this past summer, our opening game for the Whip Snakes versus the Atlas, we went down 7-0 and we got to 10-1. And once again, I was like, they're actually going to put 40 on us because there's a shot clock and a 2-point line. We ended up closing the gap a little bit, but I think any of us have been a part of those games where at the end of the first quarter, you just sit there and you're like, what is happening here?
Yeah. Last one that stood out to me, I remember at ACC tournament my freshman year at Syracuse 2017. We went down 13-4 to UNC at half. After just beating them, I think the week before. We were the number one team in the country, but we did go on an 8-0 run in the third quarter, but we ended up losing that game by 1. So I think that's a good thing about lacrosse. Also, like you're saying too, you can go on runs either way.
Yeah, and I think this kind of naturally brings us into our player perspective here. As we're discussing what we wanted to talk about today, it kind of plays in the theme of I think a lot of the stuff we talk about with controlling the controllables and really, our mindset. And it's the 0-0 mindset. And it's a big thing that when I was at Maryland, Coach Tillman used all the time. And it was at, any timeout, any quarter, everybody comes in the huddle and he would go, what's the score? And everybody would echo 0-0. And it was to a point where it was like comical, where guys would joke about it sometimes, but it really instilled in us, like, whether up or down, if you go up 7-1 against a team, you play like it's 0-0. Because the second you start playing to the score in that regard, teams start to come back. And it's the same the other way. You can't really have it both ways, where when you have those quarters, you go down 7-1, 8-1, you can't just think, oh, it's over. We start making it up and do different things. Now we got to keep that 0-0 mindset. And it's a really challenging thing because it's easy to get derailed by how a game's going. But I think one of the greatest skills a player and a team can cultivate is that mindset where you're very process oriented, just focused on the next play, execution, what you can control. I'm wondering, for you guys, has that I specifically, the 0-0 thing ever been something you've been coached on or coached, or is that type of mindset something you found helpful as you guys have played?
Yeah, I can't say that it's been something that's been a consistent force. I think I always just remember it being pretty common coming out of halftime, whether it was in college or different high school sports. But I do really like the emphasis on it being a consistent thing that you hit home. And I think whenever a team gets down by more than 5 goals, I think there's always a potential for a comeback because you see teams just start to play more loose with less consequence because what else can go wrong, you know? So I think that mindset certainly plays a mentality in a lot of comebacks, but I think it would prove really effective playing with a lead because I think that's where a lot of times, as soon as the team gets that kind of momentum, the other team starts playing tight, gripping the sticks too tight, and then a 5 goal lead turns to 2 or 3, and then it's a whole new ball game just like that, or 7 goes to 3 or 4, and hey, whole new ball game, and then now you're like trying to just scratch back to even. So I could see that being really effective.
Yeah, I agree with you, Deemer. I think, candidly, yes, I have heard it. Yes, a lot of halftime talk, especially when you're down, or up. But I think unless it's something you're preaching all the time, I do, or at least I did find it a little bit hard to buy into. Just like, well, the game's not 0-0, but I think the mentality really should be. And I think, Deemer, you kind of nailed it on the head. I think it's so important if you do have the lead, right? If you go up 5-0, that doesn't mean now you throw behind the back every possession or take a bad shot with a low angle and get no backup. I'm not surprised to hear that Maryland is a huge part of what they do. I feel like Maryland does play like that all the time. They're not a team that's going to really loosen up and start making errors when they go up big, but if you're losing from that perspective, I think it's really important. And this is probably another compliment to Maryland, but like you do have to trust in the process of what you just did that entire week leading up to the game. Like, all the scouting work that you did. I'm not saying to not make any adjustments, and adjustments are definitely key, but I think you have to find the right balance there, which I think does help with that 0-0 mindset.
Yeah, and you guys both make a good point of like the game is not actually 0-0, right? So and I understand that frustration. And I think a lot of players, that's the feedback, and maybe it's they want to appease the coach. So yeah, 0-0, got it. But the point is it's a 0-0 mindset. You don't tactically play like it's 0-0 if you're down by, 6 goals or like 3 goals with 3 minutes left. Tactically, you adjust. That's the coach's job, right? To adjust. Here's what we're doing. Here's the pace we have to play. We're doubling here. We have to go here. But the mindset of your belief of changing the play, the way you play, should not be affected by the scorer. And if you're going to determine how you play based off you're running a calculation in your head of our likelihood to win, and it's pretty high, so I'm going to take it easy. Oh, it's pretty low and not really worth trying anymore. That is kind of the point of the 0-0 mindset. And I think a really important piece of it is people won't buy into it if it's something you try to turn on. Like, oh, things aren't going well, turn it on. Things are going really well, got to reel them back in. It's got to be things like that have to be cultivated. And it just, there's too much stress. It's too challenging to change behavioral patterns in the moment just by putting like a gimmick on. So whether you call it 0-0 or whatever, I do think this idea of like the best players, the best teams, they don't ride the wave of the game. They might play with some emotion, but they're not, emotional. They're not emotionally driven throughout the game. There's a stoic element to it. And I also don't think they're overly obsessed with focused on winning. Like they will make winning plays, but they're not like looking at the score, like trying to calculate a win. They're just going to go make winning plays over and over again. And that's more process oriented. And I think that's a hard thing, for teams, players to focus on because they want to win so bad, but wanting to win can actually be distracting from doing the things you need to win.
It reminds me a little bit of, we had Sam Kane on earlier this winter after Harvard had a big win up at Syracuse. And, Sam Kane, we talked about him a lot, phenomenal attackman for Harvard, can probably be a Wharton finalist this year. Before he even touched the ball in that game, it was 5-0 Syracuse. And I remember asking about it, like, what did you think about that? How did that go? And I think you do have to have that like business-like approach to it, right? Like, okay, well, now we have the ball. Now I have to do my job. Like, I can't worry too much. And also, different point in the game. Like, it's the first quarter. If you go into panic mode, well, then the game's over already for you. So I had a lot of respect for kind of the way that he talked about that. And then, they did put that, they implemented it. They were extremely efficient, but they had a great game plan, and they ended up walking away with a win.
I've always really liked listening to Mark Lassini too. He does a lot of mental performance coaching and works with teams and high performing executives and professionals. And he always talked about, the more that you want something, the more the percentages of it not happening go up, and just a quote along those lines. And that always resonated when we were, I think in 2013, I think one of the mottos that Coach Danowski put on our t-shirts was do less. And one of the ideas around do less, which now this is 12 years ago, was, just not trying too hard, not, wanting it so bad that to everything that we're saying here that you get clouded or you become too outcome focused. And, with our team at the time, it was never a problem of working hard enough, so I think that mindset tried to peel us back a little bit and take some of that pressure off.
That's a great coaching piece from Coach Danowski, reading his team, right? And saying like, what this team needs to hear is do less. It's like the Forgetting Sarah Marshall scene where he's like surfing. I don't know if you guys have seen that, where he's like, you're doing too much, you got to do less. And then eventually he just like doesn't get up on the board at all. And Paul Rudd's like, well, you got to do something.
We were just talking about that too. It's no, it's exactly right. And I think that's where, again, that's the art of coaching, reading your team, your personnel, understanding your players, hearing your players. And I just think in general, a lot of the lacrosse players that I've come across, a lot of them are high achieving, work hard types. Like there's even very few kids you come across that really don't care at all about the classroom, that you're like begging to get them to go to class. There's maybe, a couple out there. And so more so just to kind of speak the mentality that most kids are showing up and working pretty hard. And, there's just more nuance to what's going to maybe motivate them or get them to unlock that, high performance.
This past summer, and it's cool for me still playing. And I feel like I just keep learning, I guess, more about, whether it's being a leader on a team or just being on a team and getting to play with so many other guys that devote their lives to this. You learn from a lot of them. And one of our other captains for the Whipsnakes is Jake Bernhardt. Jake was a captain in Maryland when I got there. He's the head coach at Colby right now. And he's always a guy, comes from a family of coaches, always a guy that I've really respected the way he looked at the game. And we're 2-4 to start the season, but we're close. And you guys know how pro lacrosse kind of works, where everybody's like close. Everybody's good enough, but it's like the winning teams like figure something out, and the losing teams are always like right there, but can't kind of turn it on. And we kept talking about like, we're winning this game, like all this stuff. We weren't winning games. And then Jake's really good at telling the truth. And he doesn't really care how he says it. He's going to be direct and tell it to you. And he said something along the lines of, who talks about winning all the time? Losers. And it kind of just like struck and made a lot of sense, because we were talking about wanting to win, but it was distracting from us doing the things we needed to do to win. And so that became a huge focus for our team throughout the year of stop worrying about winning the game. Execute this next play. Like you have to go after that ground ball, like as if that getting that ground ball is winning. Like that, like it's not about, forget like the outcome. You have to compete every play, and kind of let go of the outcome. And it's a bit freeing. And honestly, like after that point, we won every game until we lost in the championship. And I'm not saying like that's automatically going to happen, but a big piece of that in my mind was a huge shift in our mindset. And it positively impacted our culture, because guys were willing to buy into like, we're going to do our jobs the best we can and trust that it's going to take care of itself. And we won some games because of it. But to me, that was a big click, because sometimes you think like Michael Jordan was like such a winner, like these guys were winners. They loved winning and they did, but they didn't just think about winning games. They played each moment as, a competitor to win. I don't know, something that clicked for me recently and kind of felt freeing to allow yourself to let go of like needing to win versus like doing everything you can that you're supposed to do in that play in that moment.
It's kind of like a lot of people talk about, Jordan and Kobe in terms of just their desire to compete. They love competing. You hear a lot of emphasis around competing versus, again, just winning versus losing, or, hating to lose, love competing. And then maybe more wins than not are a result of some of that mindset too. So it's interesting. Matt, one question I have for you, now having played as long as you have every year, and we're at that time now where you're starting to really gear up, getting ready for summer. I think the mental game is one that is never just this thing that and then you just always do it. Like you're kind of even talking about how you always need those reminders. How do you keep reminding yourself or working on that so that you keep growing from an approach perspective versus, just being static or kind of letting yourself feel like, hey, I know this, and leaving it at that? Like, how do you keep approaching that year in, year out now that you're so many years in the league and playing high level in college as well?
It's a great question. I think there's a difference between knowing something and like appreciating it, understanding it, buying into it. I don't know that I necessarily like the stuff that's kind of like speaking to me now is like stuff I'd never heard before. But I think as I get older, I'm appreciating it in a different way and understanding some of it. For example, like Jake basically telling us like, hey, we need to focus on the next play in the process, not the outcome. Like I've heard that a billion times, but that's just, it kind of made sense. And I think over time for me, I've just learned that playing defense in professional lacrosse where everything is on social media and games, like you end up on the wrong side of highlights a lot of times. I've been on Sports Center for the wrong reasons, probably 3 or 4 times of like getting scored on. And so if you care too much about like the non-important things, it'll eat away at you and it'll kill you. And so that to me, that just wears you down. And so I've just really been able to kind of let go of like my need to be like viewed a certain way. Like I want to be a great teammate. I love my teammates. I look forward to hanging out with them. I like playing with them. I love being on a team. And so to continue playing, I've had to double down on like making sure that I really love playing. I love the process of going to practice. I like being on calls with my teammates. I enjoy spending time with them. I still love competing and letting that competing taking us where it goes. Like we're going for a championship every year, but it's all about like that process. And to me, it's really freeing because if I was like doing this, I need to win a championship. I need to win this award. I need to have a good season. And I start not having those things because they're largely out of my control. It wears you down. And so not to sound cheesy, but I do think the stuff we're talking about, like I've really tried. I feel like I've bought into another level of that. And that's made me really like not stress out so much about playing and actually like be able to enjoy competing. I still get like, it still sucks when I get beat for a goal and I know I'm going to get tagged on some, 11-year-old's going to like DM me that goal for some reason. And it's going to end up on TikTok. And my high school kids showed me the other day on the bus. They're like, hey coach, have you seen this? And it's like 2 years ago, like Sours beating me for, I'm like, yeah, guys, I've seen it. Like, but like, and even, I'm working out with Jack Posey, who plays for the Chaos, and he's a younger guy. And he was like, because we were like joking about it, he's like, how do you deal with like, like being on the wrong side of a highlight clip? And for a long time, I was so embarrassed by it because I was so proud to be a good player. And I was just like, honestly, it's just part of it. Like, it's just all part of it. Like, if you're going to commit to doing this, you have to accept the wins and the losses all the same, the stops and the getting beat. And I feel like I've gotten better at that. And that's allowed me to enjoy playing more than being so afraid of like losing or getting beat or getting embarrassed.
I think all that is awesome. And just hearing you talk about that, obviously, like, it takes a lot. I don't think people realize how hard it is to continue playing professional lacrosse for as long as you have and at the level that you are doing it. Like it's very impressive. So it's interesting to hear, all the stuff that goes into it. One quick thing that I talk a lot with a lot of offensive players that I had worked on just as I was playing, like in terms of not caring, right? Like I think I used to be so aware of like, I don't want to have a turnover. Like I don't want to have a turnover. I don't want to get stripped. Like that can't happen. And it's like, okay, well, if you're an attackman and you're a ball carrying attackman, you leave the game with 0 turnovers, were you really doing your absolute best to help the team out? Were you really like working as hard as you could, taking, the necessary risk? I'm not saying go into the game and have 5 or 6 turnovers, but if you leave that game with, 1 goal, 1 assist and 0 turnovers, are you really doing your team, justice? Are you really helping your coaching staff and, everyone around you? So I just think from an offensive perspective, you do have to give yourself some leeway, right, to be able to make mistakes. And I think, that was hard for me to learn early on, right? I wanted to have no turnovers. I thought it was the worst thing ever. But as I got older, I was like, it's fine if I have 1 or 2, if that then contributes to me, having 4 or 5 points and helping my team out that much more.
Yeah, to me, it brings up that idea as well of, really understanding what your role in your job is. Because the more that you define it as your role in your job, it also takes the emotion out of, doing it or not doing it. And you can really reflect and say, am I doing what needs to be done to be a great teammate and help my team win, or am I not? I relate that a lot offensively too, to players, being aggressive enough, dodging, taking the, enough shots, versus passing them up. And there's a lot of situations that can really kind of fine tune, and pinpoint like at their respective positions where, really it comes down to, are you doing your job? And it's not about, the emotion or the feel of it, but doing what needs to be done. And, Matt, it is really cool to hear you talk about that too, because, I went through a lot of that early on when starting FCL and still playing and, feeling like, hey, if I, had good games or good clips, that's like positive for what we're doing. And if I had bad performances or season wasn't going, the way I wanted it to, then that's bad, for business, for reputation, and it was definitely, hard to, work through at times. But I think your point about it being part of the process and, also it kind of, for me too, like came back to trying to set an example for how, we would want the younger players in our community to be acting and carrying themselves, and trying to put their best foot forward every time out. And that's all you can control, and the more you focus on the things that you can't control, the more that, you're just going to be in a state that is not optimal to being your best on and off the field.
At the risk of sounding like sounding boards for these things, I think here's the hard part about a lot of what we're talking about is it's not new information for a lot of people. It's just, you have to meet it where it is. And so like somebody's going to hear this and be like, yes, I get that. Somebody's going to be like, I've read that. I've heard that a million times. Cool. I'll try to do it. And I was listening to this podcast that talked about like the hard thing with philosophy is it needs so much context. Otherwise, everybody could read 5 philosophy books, learn everything about philosophy and live a perfect life, right? Like it needs context for your situation so that you can apply it in a meaningful way. So I totally get that from a lot of people, but maybe I think 2 things I would focus on if this is something that you want to prioritize is what is your intent as a teammate and as a player? And I would say that I would challenge you, because it has helped me over time, to really actually think about it. Like, is your actual intent to have great stats? You might say, I want to be a great teammate, but is your intent, like, do you get upset when you don't have great stats? That means your intent, like, that means what's important to you is having, goals. For me, for a while, I would say be a great teammate, but if I gave up a goal, I was upset. But our game plan was, hey, if they're going to score 1 or 2 unassisted goals against our close guys, that's okay. They're not going to win that way, right? So I was misaligned internally with what was actually like the team needed from me. And so if I give up a goal and I get all upset about it, I'm going to hurt the team because I'm going to be focused on me and what I did wrong. So sometimes like you make a mistake, but you need to have the second piece here is you need to have resilience. Like you have to be able to handle making a mistake and bouncing back and not spiral. And so I do think that if you really, 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 truly, deeply have the intent to be like, I'm going to do whatever my team needs from me, that is my only calling. And I am going to double down on that. And if that's score goals today, it is. And if that's just be a ball mover today, it is. And if that's have, whatever, it might be different. And if you can buy into that and just say, that's all I really care about. I don't care about getting ranked. I know that stuff's hard, but if you can actually do that, it'll be freeing. And I believe you'll actually play better because of it. And then if you can cultivate a sense of resilience where if you make a mistake, notice what you say to yourself, notice what your body language is, notice how you feel when you go home. The best people can make those mistakes, acknowledge them. They happen, they're real, they happened, but you don't beat yourself up and spiral. And so that stuff's hard, but I honestly think if you look at the best leaders, teammates, people over time, they had those components where they were driven to serve their team the best they could, and they were resilient in the face of adversity because things are going. Okay, well, wrapping up there, guys, do you want to move on to GPUs? Deemer, want to kick us off?
Yeah, I had a great weekend of GPUs from my perspective. My game was Boston College versus UNC. Electric matchup, came down to the wire. North Carolina got the win at home. Caroline Godine, a top 2022 recruit, stepped up with a hat trick. Ashley Humphrey was face guarded, part of the Boston College defensive strategy, but they were able to overcome and really make a nice comeback after going down 5-1 early in the game. Lexi Zank, a top 2024 goalie recruit out of St. Anthony's. She subbed in, went 50% in the cage, had some huge saves down the stretch. North Carolina's Ellie Traggio on defense, another great outing, caused turnover and 4 ground balls. And Brooklyn Walker Welch had 4 ground balls. Excited to see this matchup again. We could potentially see this another time, possibly in the ACC finals, and then depending how seedings shake out in the semis or finals as well of the NCAA tournament. My players, I had brother and sister Ryan and Kate Levy. Ryan had a hat trick versus UVA, coming off of 2 goals versus Army last week. It was UNC alumni weekend. His production needs to continue for UNC, getting production outside of Duffy and Petramala. And then Kate Levy, she's been an impact freshman contributor for North Carolina, 1 goal and 3 draw controls versus Boston College. My unit, I would say I was shocked. I really thought that Hopkins had a opportunity to take down Northwestern in the regular season matchup last Thursday, but their draw unit really stood out. They blitzed Hopkins from the start. Sam Smith had 12 draw controls. She takes the draw. Sammy White and Madison Taylor on the circle, 2 of the best athletes in the country. Really impressive performance overall. They won 18 or 19 draw controls, and they really dominated possession for a majority of the game. So shout out to my GPUs there.
Awesome. Stephen, want to go next?
Yeah, so my game of the week was Syracuse Notre Dame. Going into this, Syracuse has not beaten Notre Dame since 2018. So just a big game that was circled on the calendar. And Notre Dame hasn't only beaten Syracuse, they've really dominated them, winning games, by 7 to 10 plus goals in the last couple of years. This game started off with Notre Dame going up 3-0, and it felt like it might just be, another game in this series where Notre Dame dominates. But Syracuse responded really well. I believe they went on a 9-0 run after that. Really impressive performance from, top to bottom. I think that's probably Syracuse's best win of the season, but also in a long time, and, putting it together. And, we've highlighted Joey Spallina, Johnny Mullen. I thought Jimmy McCool, the goalie, played well, and, huge win in front of a really big crowd as well. A player that I wanted to highlight, not for really last week's performance, but just overall that is standing out. Riley Sullivan, senior attackman from Lafayette. He leads the nation in assists per game at 3.5 per game, and he is second in the country in points per game with 6.1. Those are pretty serious numbers. So I wanted to give him a shout out here. And then my unit, I just commented on Yale's, the women's team, their discipline. Through 12 games, they only have 13 yellow cards. In the women's game, you can get a green card, a yellow card, a red card. And just with man up units, improving or just teams being on the man up a little bit more, the less you foul, the better. So I wanted to shout out, I think That's top to bottom, from attackers to midfielders to defenders, whether it's in the ride or on close defense. Very impressive stat there. And they just had a huge win against Syracuse last week.
Awesome. All right. Games here for me. I have Ohio State versus Hopkins. Ohio State won that 14-10. For Ohio State, Alex Marinier, I heard, I think it's Marinier. There's an I there. I was listening to the broadcast. 6-1 against Hopkins. And then Garrett Haas 3-1. Kind of guys, as you watch that film, like Marinier had 5 in the first half. More, and he even quoted after the game, like, I have the easiest job in the world. My teammates find me. He's kind of on the receiving end of a lot of these, dodges and initiation. The Ohio State team, I know you've broken down the midfield dodging before. They're a lot to handle. They're, the way Coach Myers mentioned after the game that Hopkins plays defense a very specific way, different than Ohio State does. We've talked about it before. They get up, funnel you down the side. They slide early. They try to press you, extend to X. And I think Ohio State was able to kind of either S dodge or get enough leverage off those dodges. And you saw them skip it back through across the top a lot to that open guy and kind of be able to fire it through. And that's where Marinier was, on the receiving end of a lot of those shots. Haas was a guy that, unassisted goals, an invert goal, a dodge against Scott Smith, unassisted, impressive takes, one lefty, one righty from X, a guy that I thought looked really good. Ohio State has 11 wins in a row, coming off that opener loss to Utah where, everybody thought their season was over. And then Caleb Fiak had 60% in the cage. And to me, he's been one of the guys that I think kind of ties this whole thing together, where they have a solid offense, they have a good offense, a good defense, and then he's playing great in the goal. The interesting thing is they're not facing off well. Hopkins faced off at 68%, and I would say largely won the middle of the field. So I think you look at just possession efficiency and saves there, and Ohio State has really been proven to be a great team in those categories so far. My player, Cardin Stoller, 70% against Maryland. He is the goalie for Rutgers. They beat Maryland 8-6, held Maryland to 6 goals, and he scored a goal, as Stephen mentioned earlier. So I think anytime a goalie scores a goal in these games, deserves a shout out, but also holding Maryland to 6 goals and him saving the ball at 70% and a Big Ten matchup is a huge game for him. And then lastly, my unit is UNC's offense. They put up 18 goals against UVA, number 7 shooting percentage on the season. They are, kind of, we talked about the two-headed monster in Dom Petramalo and Owen Duffy. Dom is 4th in the country in goals per game, about 3.5, and Duffy's like 21st at 3-ish goals per game. So they're both scoring a lot. But UNC had 10 goal scorers this game. So as well as those guys are playing, and as much of a handful as they are, they have other guys stepping up. And so I think if UNC's entire offense can continue to contribute like that, they become a very difficult team to scout, because those are two matchups that even your best polls for most teams in the country are going to struggle with Duffy and Petramalo, the way they pick from, the way those guys can score. And if you need to slide into support to those guys and these other guys can cash in, that's a really challenging offense to go against. So just wanted to shout out UNC's offense there. Obviously, putting up 18 goals is no easy feat against anybody, but the way they did it, I think, is impressive.
One thing I want to look more into, I've started clipping a couple clips, so hopefully no one listening beats us to the punch here. But I think that the way that Duffy is able to not only handle and manipulate slides, but beat slides is incredibly impressive. The assist that he had to Petramalo, where again UVA sends the pull slide, he rolls back, he handles it, hits a look off skip pass. It reminded me of a clip earlier in the season where multiple times Hopkins slides to him and then he ducks under the slide or manipulates posture and then attacks. He's just very Jordan Wolf-esque, but I would say used in a lot more different spots than Jordan was. And so what makes that really difficult is that I just think you really have to stay on the double. You have to have really high level of discipline in terms of, your sliding angles and making sure that you really collapse and trap him. Otherwise, he's just going to keep carrying the ball and possibly beat you. So I just think that's something that we haven't seen a whole lot of, when most offensive players are taught to draw the double and just swing it.
Yeah, I think he's probably maybe the most athletic dodger in the country. Maybe you put CJ Kirst right there with him, but I think just the way that Duffy moves, I think Jordan Wolf comparison is nice. I think he is I don't know if slicker is the right word, but I think just the way that he maneuvers, from up top and the wing and from behind, he's been incredibly impressive, and clearly really hard to stop.
I agree. I think the Wolf comparison's reasonable. I'd say I know what you're saying, Stephen. I think Duffy can score in more ways. I think, and Deemer knows this better than anybody. I think what made Jordan Wolf special is not the multiple ways he could score, but how good he was, one, at scoring the way he did, and two, um, Jordan's one of those, like, all times, like, he showed up in big moments, and you guys won championships with Jordan Wolf. So I think that's what, in my opinion, when people start talking about, a Jordan Wolf, like, there's a test of time to be a Jordan Wolf, in my opinion. But I will say I haven't seen a Dodger like Owen Duffy in a really long time. That is, and CJ Kurst, that are two guys that are so challenging to cover, even with teams' best polls.
I would say, and this is a little off topic, but not really, Jordan Wolf, probably the best player to never win the Torin also.
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that one.
Fair.
We've been down this road before.
Almost Torin time. Guys, one thing as we kind of naturally progress here for our we do a topic where we do like a breakdown trends. The three of us have been talking a little bit about stats, and I want to preface this whole conversation that none of us are like quantitative analysis experts, but there's a lot of publicly available data. If you want to search around the NCAA.com and Inside Lacrosse and some of these other places where you can pull these stats, and we talk about them anecdotally every week. We say, hey, this team did well. They, their goalie saved at 60%. This team faced off at 38%. I think two that always pop out, save percentage and face-off percentage. And another one we added was shooting percentage. And I think historically, when us old guys were in college pre-shot clock, you kind of said any team that was, people sometimes say adding up over 100 between your percentages of face-off and goalie, or like if you were 60 and 60, so you faced off at 60% and your goalie was saving at 60%, like that was an elite team, and that's like a championship caliber team. I think the shot clock changed things. I do, because I think possessions, I think they mean a little bit less, obviously, because teams can't just win it, milk a clock for as long as they need to get the highest quality shot. So I think you're seeing the face-off percentage not matter quite as much. And I think because the flip side of that is your shooting percentage. As you're getting these offensive possessions, how efficient are you? I know efficiency is a little bit different, but when you get shots, are you cashing them in and are they turning into goals, or is the goalie have a high save percentage? So we pulled the top 20 media poll for this week, and we pulled their shooting percentage, their face-off rank, and their save percentage. Guys, I know you've looked at this table. I'm wondering, off the top, any stats stand out to you here on some of these top teams?
Yeah, I think, it's an easy one, but you look at Cornell, the number one team in the country right now, and their shooting rank is 1. One thing that I've been focusing on a little bit this season, when people talk about turnovers, I don't think all turnovers are created equally, right? If you take a bad shot and it gets saved, the goalie's able to catch it in their stick and clear it the other way. I look at that as a turnover. If you miss the cage, maybe on a low angle shot, your teammate doesn't have backup, I think that is also a turnover, but it's not the same. I don't believe it's statted the same as, I'm carrying the ball and, Dunn strips me and okay, it's a college turnover, him turnover for me, or, I throw a bad pass out of bounds. So I just think having shooting discipline is really important. And I think, we've talked about it at great length. This season is really tight in terms of who the top teams are, especially on the men's side. Like, I don't even know who's going to get a top 8 seed and be a host. So I just think that's something that really stands out, and it's going to matter a lot as we get down the stretch here.
Yeah, I would say, going off that too, one thing, like you're talking about, Cornell's shooting percentage and being the top shooting team in the country, their assist rate is also pretty high. We don't have it relative to other teams right now, but 104 out of their 159 goals have been assisted. So that's 65% of their goals are assisted. So when you think about even, getting quality shots, the fact that they're getting so many looks where the goalie has to readjust, track the ball, and then whether it's inside or step down looks, that's contributing to their shot percentage. So I do think that's probably a high number in terms of assisted scoring rate. and something that I think is really benefiting the Cornell shooters.
Yeah, so an interesting, if you kind of look at these stats, I'll just read out a few of them. So in face-off rank in the top 20, right, the top 20 media poll for this week, Syracuse is ranked number 4 in the media poll. They're number 7 face-off rank. North Carolina is number 7 in the media poll. They're number 2 for face-off rank. And then Johns Hopkins is number 19 in the media poll. They are number 9 in face-off rank. In the top 20 teams, those are the only 3 in top 10 face-off rank. All right, so it's highest face-off percentages. Now, if you go to shooting, you have Cornell, Ohio State, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Harvard, and Duke, all within the top 10 for shooting percentage rank. So now you have 6 teams in the top 10, and Maryland's number 11 and St. Joe's is number 12. So you have more teams in the top 20 that are close to that top 10, top 15 in shooting percentage. That's what shooting rank is, shooting percentage. And then lastly, when you go to save percentage, you have Ohio State number 3, Princeton's number 11, Syracuse number 8, Army number 1, Maryland number 4, BU number 6, Rutgers number 10, and Dartmouth number 7 in save percentage. So it's a pretty simple analysis. Obviously, like, I'm not, a statistical expert, and somebody could probably peel this different ways. But when you look at it anecdotally, the top 20 teams, you have almost half of them. So you have kind of 5, you have 8 of them in the top 11 for save percentage. And most of them, a handful of others, you have St. Joe's at number 15, you have Notre Dame at number 16, are kind of around that realm. And so what I've seen anecdotally when we've talked, a lot of these upset games, we've seen teams with poor face-off percentages, but a lot of times their goalie is playing very well and saving, 60+%.
Yeah. I mean, goalie play is, really important and can be a massive game changer, in a lot of ways. Even just, take a look at, I think the best example, just even from this last weekend with Rutgers versus Maryland, I was able to catch some of the highlights, but a lot of the things that I was reading on, Maryland was able to generate really good looks, but the Rutgers goalie, just kept coming up with stop after stop, that ends up stifling an offense. And ultimately just keeps them off the scoreboard.
One thing that, and again, this might be statted, I think, Zach at Lax Reference does a great job. I've always seen like the idea around expected goals average. I'm not up to speed on if there's like an expected save average, but also it would be just really fascinating to think about when you look at some of these games and some of the big shots that it comes down to. Like when I think of McEnany saving those 2 shots from Kavanaugh on the doorstep in that last game, his percentage expectancy of making that save is probably extremely low, and he steals a few. And then I think on the flip side, if there's ones that are, hey, outside 10 yards, maybe lower angle, how many goalies do not give up those 1 or 2 easy ones? And I think those can really swing a team in different directions. And I think that's where it'll just be very interesting down the stretch, some of the goalie play and how that's going to impact some of these seedings and final team performances as they get in the conference tournament play.
Yeah, and I think Zach at Lacrosse Reference, I think they do a great job, and quite frankly, a lot of that stuff is over my head. I just haven't spent the time to dig into it. As I was looking through some of this stuff, I did see one of their articles where he wrote about the face-off, and he said one of the lines was, in approximately 90% of Division I men's lacrosse games, the team with the better per possession efficiency wins regardless of face-off dominance. So per possession efficiency over face-off dominance at like a 90% rate. So, not that face-offs are unimportant, but I think with the shot clock era, we're just seeing that they mean less if you have an offense that can generate high-quality shots on a consistent basis, a goalie that can save the shots they need to, and a defense that can make it challenging for defense to generate high quality shots. It's a little different where when we played, you win a face-off and you can play 2 to 3 minutes of offense, wear somebody down, really control the clock. I think we're looking at possession efficiency is starting to continue to matter more, where teams can actually, it sounds obvious, but can actually capitalize and score within the time frame that they have the ball. Deemer, question for you. Curious, you look at shooting percentage. Obviously, it's about, number of shots and how often it goes in, but a big piece of that is, shot selection and shot quality. How do you think an offense or a team should look at like high quality shots and making sure that the appropriate shot selection is something they value and prioritize?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to look at it, and it's definitely stuff that we've tried to implement more and more into our teaching and training. But I think one, you can really start with an emphasis on working to get the middle of the field. I think that's, again, that's off the dodge. You're looking to really try to be aggressive about attacking and getting top side or coming off of a pick, maybe in a pairs or mirror type look and trying to get to the middle of the field. I think the next best thing, if you can't get to the middle always, but maybe the defense is really giving you the underneath, it's getting your stick back to the middle. It's a simple way to increase your shooting angle. You've really seen the influence of, Canadians in our game of, that's how they get their shots off, playing to their strong hand. And now, more American players have adopted that, and more offenses and coaches have been open-minded to players shooting like that with again, your sticks to the inside versus the traditional sticks to the outside away from the defender. So that's a simple way to upgrade. If you're moving to the net in that situation, there's still times where you can get a nice shot off with your outside hand and, say you maybe beat a goalie 5-hole, but that's definitely a big way to upgrade. I think the next is, really trying to hone in on players' shooting ranges, and getting within range relative to their skill set. A 12 or 13-yard step down might be, really good for, some of the big time guys. And when you see like a Petramala or a Hunter Chauvet, they're going to be more likely and have more leeway to pull it from those distances. But obviously any yard closer you can get, your percentages should generally increase. So the closer you can get, the better. And I think the teams that, do a nice job of, hey, that's a good shot, we could take this, but maybe they're just really looking for that upgrade or that one more pass. Coach Galloway's talked about that in our community, valuing the one more. And I do think a lot of offenses prioritize that. I do think watching Cornell, I just anecdotally can think of a few examples of those guys passing up the hash or, low wing shots for nice cross crease feeds. So that's just a nice example of how you can, again, upgrade and value that one more pass. And then I think lastly, I touched on it a bit earlier, but, assisted versus unassisted goals. I think it's just another layer that the goalie has to adjust to. They're zoned in on one player, the ball moves, and then a shot's coming out pretty quickly. I think that benefits the offense, and it's something that, the more that ball is swinging side to side or coming from low to high, below goal line to an inside look, I just think it's harder for the goalie to track. So those are some core things that I think are pretty tangible that, coaches are trying to weave into their offensive principles and what they want their guys to value when really just trying to discern between a good shot and a great shot or a good shot and a turnover like shot.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And you mentioned Coach Galloway, John Galloway, the head coach at Jacksonville. He came on our community and did a webinar on stats that matter to Jacksonville, and he kind of presented their shooting rules. And I think he would tell you, and a lot of coaches would, it's not that their rules are the ones that are perfect or right, but they're clear for their guys. So their guys know like how they define a quality shot, stick to the middle. John kind of sets a range. He was like, 8 to 10, I forget exactly what it is, but this range, like shooting on the run outside of this range is not a good shot for us. If your feet are set, it can be a good shot. And he goes, look, if a guy proves that they can score that, then we'll adjust the rule for that player. But that's not like everybody doesn't have that green light. Kind of talked about from X, like if you're turning the corner and you miss a shot and that shot goes out the sideline, right, rather than the end line, that's not, it means you didn't have enough angle, right? You tried to shoot a low angle shot. And so I think being like that's something that was interesting for me to hear, like specific things that like, oh, that's a good way to define quality shots. Now I could kind of think about, as a defensive coach, reverse engineering that, like, what do you want to give up or what are you willing to give up? So those are really great points. I love hearing about quality shots, especially from offensive-minded people.
Matt, one thing that I think is really interesting as well, back in 2021, Joe Keegan did a nice PLL analytics off of the back of that PLL season. And one of the takeaways he had was the efficiency of the two-man game. And in 2021, league-wide shooting percentage off a shot generated by the two-man game was 34%. League-wide shooting percentage off a shot generated by a dodge in 2021 was 24.5%. So a 10% shot difference when incorporating some version of a two-man game. I think, again, like those are stats that they matter, and again, it doesn't mean that every shot you take is a two-man game related shot, but it does show a benefit to incorporating that into your offense. And, now 4 years later, when we look at the college and the pro game, again, almost every possession is some form of picks, picks below goal line, picks on the wing, some version of two-man game is incorporated into a lot of principles-based offense. And so, again, that's it's just really interesting to see.
Yeah, I've been trying to categorize the way offenses initiate for some of our high school guys. And I kind of got into like 3 categories at a high level. You have ISO, pick, and then mirror. I use the third, right? So you either ISO, you bring out the whole area of the field, you bring a pick to it, or a hard pick, or you bring a guy to it that's just going to play off it. I think the pick and the mirror, you can both consider two-man game, one a harder two-man game and one a softer one. But it's interesting because you're seeing a lot less of the ISO, especially at the college level. There's not a ton of pure ISO. I want to say at the college level, a lot of pick, a lot of mirror. And I think the reason being is like you kind of get a read option off it right away where you might get a quick advantage with the ball carrier, or you might get a quick throwback, and that can either be the goal or that can just trigger the offense. So I think you're seeing way more of that, where I think you used to see maybe a little bit more of ISO at the collegiate level. High school level, we'll still see a lot of ISO because there's values that high school teams can't always, they have mismatches. But I think you see that PLL, almost every possession has a pick, a mirror, a slip, and that's how everything's initiated.
Well, how about going off of that just quickly? Think about almost every basketball possession you see now. Do you not think that all of those guys are so talented and skilled enough where they could just ISO their guy and play that one-on-one style, half court game? Like they certainly could, but I think also the defenses and athletes in lacrosse only continue to improve. The rise of the short stick D-midi has only become more and more of this specialized, beast-like position. So dodging a short stick, I sent you guys something yesterday. In 12 games, Aiden McGuire at Duke as a short stick has 23 caused turnovers. He's the only short stick in the top 50 that has, those kind of numbers. But I do think every team now, we put something out about the Ohio State rope unit. They've got short stick defenders that are really tough to cover. But when you introduce a mirror, when you introduce some two-man game, you're introducing some complexity, some decisions to be made, some communication that has to happen. And I just think you increase the chances that defenders can make a mistake versus if you allow them to get really zeroed in on their matchup, a lot of guys can really step up and win a majority of those battles. So I think, when you look at the pick and roll and hoops becoming such a, constant theme every time down, I think we're seeing a lot of that in lacrosse as well.
I think those are great points. I think anybody that's watching college lacrosse this weekend, I think you'll notice a lot of either pick or mirror to the ball in almost every initiation. Stephen, that being said, do you want to look ahead here and talk about some of the games we have coming up this weekend?
Yeah, huge weekend ahead. Taking a look for the men's side on Saturday. So a Big Ten matchup. We've got Hopkins at Penn State. This is 1 p.m. on Saturday. Hopkins is on a 3-game skid right now. They are 0-3 in the Big Ten. This was an overtime game last year at Hopkins. Hopkins ended up coming away with the win. These are the bottom 2 teams in the Big Ten right now. So, a lot for these 2 teams to be fighting for. 2 p.m. Saturday, we have Maryland at Ohio State. Ohio State is number 1 in the Big Ten right now. This is, I saw it on Twitter, this is going to be, a rematch of where the glove gate, all that talk came from. If anyone wants my opinion on that, I think it was totally fair of Tillman to call that, and I'm happy to dive deeper into that if anyone wants to. We have Syracuse at Cornell, 4 p.m. on Saturday. This is a neutral site game on Long Island. This was a wild finish last year. Kurtz had the overtime winner. Cornell went on a 5-1 run in the fourth, and that was after Syracuse started the game on a 7-0 run. So a lot of stuff that we were talking about earlier in this podcast, of having that 0-0 mindset, being able to come back. 2 big ACC matchups. We've got North Carolina at Duke. That's going to be 4 p.m. Saturday on the ACC network. And then Virginia at Notre Dame, 5 p.m. Saturday on ESPNU. Virginia looks to be the odd man out right now in the ACC. They're trying to get that, one of the last spots in the ACC tournament. ACC does not have an automatic qualifier, but that's going to be a big game, along with the UNC Duke one. Very curious to see how that one plays out. And then finally on Sunday, big game, Michigan at Rutgers. That's going to be noon on the Big Ten network. We talked about it a little while ago, but no more Sunday night Big Ten games. But, Sunday afternoon, we'll have to deal with. Michigan is number 2 in the Big Ten right now. Rutgers is number 3 in the Big Ten right now. I believe Maryland is sitting at 4 after that Rutgers win. So big week ahead. Really looking forward to a lot of these games. I will be at the Cornell-Syracuse game on Long Island, so really looking forward to that.
One thing I want to point out, I do have some beef with the Big Ten and the Big Ten network on 2 fronts. One front, the fact that we only had a couple of these Sunday night games is just really unfortunate when the conference might be the best it's ever been. And we need more Joe Beninati on broadcast. Him and Mark Dixon do a fantastic job. 2, my gripe now becomes the women's side. This Thursday, Sunday scheduling action that they've been having going on in the Big Ten has just been completely brutal, like for TV, travel, getting to games, like at least make it Friday, Sunday. So definitely disappointed with the Big Ten in terms of scheduling. Hopefully I don't offend anyone with that. I'm probably saying a lot of what people are thinking.
The Big Ten's flipped on its head. Like, you were to tell me, I don't know, just like even like 2 or 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, even from where, not that these standings, they'll change more throughout the next 2 or 3 weeks. We know that, but things happen fast. And I mean, Hopkins kind of being at the bottom of the Big Ten was not something I would have foreseen. And Rutgers, I think if you look at the beginning of the year, not beginning of the year, even like 3 or 4 weeks ago, you're kind of saying that Rutgers and Michigan are the odd teams out of the Big Ten. And Hopkins was playing well. Ohio State was picking up steam. Maryland was number 1 in the country. I thought Penn State was playing well. And there is nobody is safe in that conference, as has already been proven. And I think that's probably the most interesting action to watch, where you're seeing things emerge in the Ivy League. The ACC will certainly be interesting, but there's no AQ for that. So I think, we'll see how that goes. I think the Big Ten tournament action, what teams get into the NCAA tournament from the Big Ten, is still a big question mark right now.
Yeah, I mean, you look, Penn State is 5th in the Big Ten right now, and Penn State's the only team in the country that has taken down Cornell. There's talent top to bottom. Hopkins was a team, I know they're at the bottom now, but they started off the year really hot, with a lot of wins. So the Big Ten has definitely, emerged as one of the best, if not probably the best conference right now. I think the ACC is down across the board. Still think there's a lot of talent there for sure. But yeah, a lot to look forward to with a lot of these games.
I would say, in my opinion, that if you were to mash the ACC and Big Ten together right now, they would all fit pretty well. I think in the past, maybe you've looked at like one of those conferences having 2 or 3 like powerhouses compared to the other that was like more usually the ACC, I would say. But I think if you were to smash it together, like they would blend in right now, where nobody is head and shoulders above. You're seeing competition between those conferences of Maryland and Ohio State beating Notre Dame by a goal. And I think you look at that and they're pretty flat. But I just think in the Big Ten, all 6 of those teams are competing right now, where Virginia's kind of fallen off in the ACC for, lack of a better term there.
Yeah, and Virginia started out the past 2 weeks, they've been in tight games. They weren't able to close the Syracuse one, and then UNC ended up really pulling away last week. And I don't think Virginia is like an easy out by any means if you've got them left on your schedule. But I do agree there. And I think, the Big Ten might be more competitive top to bottom this year.
Yeah, guys, going off that, you mentioned the UVA and some of these games down the stretch. Sometimes with how these teams end up doing, I do think it puts pressure on the teams that should beat them. Everyone, writes it off as, okay, well, they're either going to get that win, or if they lose that game, it's only going to hurt. I think that's a tough mindset to have to go into a game with too. Whereas sometimes when okay, it's a big matchup, they're a top 10 team, like it's not going to kill you when it comes to your RPI, your strength of schedule, et cetera. So, when you're looking at a UVA on the schedule, I think they're going out to Notre Dame this weekend. You have a little more fear of like, oh, well, what if we drop this game? What's that going to do to our tournament chances, and our seeding? So I think that's always something to keep in mind with that too.
Well, Deemer, it comes back to player perspective, right? The mindset stuff we talked about of a lot of these guys. I think the best teams, and that's a really natural thing. A lot of people feel the best teams, they're not worried about what a loss is going to do to their playoff chances. Maybe the coaches, maybe the coaches think about that. But the leadership, it's like the leadership on the team, the culture's got to be, it's like, this is a game we're going to take care of business. Don't care who it is. Don't care records. And, once again, hard mindset to cultivate, but the best teams have that. The best teams have great leaders and captains and seniors that push that message to everybody and live it out in practice all week and on a daily basis. And they take care of business. Just to kind of tie that in, like that, those are the challenges that teams face. This team's down this year. This team's good this year. This team's that. And how do you view it differently, or do you approach it with the same mentality you approach everything with?
We're also we're recording this April 9th. It'll drop April 11th. So this upcoming weekend's games are April 12th. We only have the last regular season game on the men's side is April 26th. The season has absolutely flown by. It's time to kind of buckle in, and there's a lot left to the season for just a handful of teams, right? You could have, close to almost 2 months left. But it is time to dial in and, take care of business where you have to.
Awesome, guys. Well, hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in today. Another great episode. It's been really fun following along this season. Want to give another shout out. We just dropped a great version of our Coaches Corner newsletter. We're approaching 450 coaches that are subscribed for free. And we're really excited about the breakdowns and the things that we're talking about. So hopefully, if you're not subscribed and you're listening, check that out. Our weekly thought drops again today as well. We'll be talking about some things that parents can think about and some of the challenges that a lot of our parents are facing when it comes to navigating the lacrosse journey. We are including in that email a referral option and a free nugget. So check that out if you haven't already. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and enjoy the games this weekend.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.